Good morning. This is Jonathan Albin, the Game Market Guru, on Just in Time Productions Game Mastery Series, Episode 14. We today are going to be a bit of a ramble because I'm going to be discussing a subject near and dear to my heart and something that for decades I never thought about and yet recently has become somewhat of an issue, and that is the care and feeding and eventual taming and revising the murder hobo. If you are, like me, a game master that runs into players who simply see the game as a surrogate for, say, the computer game or for large games of tic-tac-toe, you know what I'm talking about in a murder hobo. The way I've heard it described is simply, hey, Scott, welcome to a discussion of murder hobos. Not that you're one or anything like that, but we are going to talk about how to recognize and control them, if you will, bring them to a better understanding of role play. The first thing I have to do is take that term and give definition to it. Hey, Allie, welcome to the show as well. When we are talking about the standard murder hobo, so to speak, we are talking about a player who's disconnected from the reality of a fantasy world and instead sees it as a pop in, pop out, shoot the monsters, take their stuff kind of endeavor. And while there is some, prurient interest in doing that, I've played lots and lots of shooter games in the past, and I still do occasionally sign on to, hey, welcome, Stephanie. Glad to have you with us. Episode 14, as we're talking about, is dealing with the murder hobo, and the clearest definition of a murder hobo is a disconnected player in a game's story who has no regard in the least for the value of the role play experience, but is instead systematically finding ways to attack and destroy the monsters, NPCs, and even the set itself of your adventure. The reason why this has come up is that there's been an increasing number of players that I've run into, especially since I started running the Adventure Leagues games, wherein there is no anchor for the player characters to have any interest in the story really whatsoever, other than the accrual of experience points, the development of their own individual characters, treasure trove, cash box, and such. So when we are dealing with these players in a one-shot adventure, it's almost impossible, because in a one-shot environment, the players all are aware that the story has no links. Hey, Matt, welcome to the show. There are no links for the murder hobo to grab a hold of. There's no reason, if you will, to become a part of the story, and therefore just going in and killing the monsters and getting the stuff seems to be the only objective. So when you are looking at a situation where you have one or more murder hobos in the party, the first thing you have to do is find ways to give them a world to grab a hold of. When, for example, I give descriptions of rooms wherein there is simply no treasure, there is no expungible, I guess, or fungible resources, I do just as strenuous a description as I would when it's chock full of stuff, because what a game master, what a storyteller needs to be able to do is shake those players from this perception that things of value are the only things described. I've I'm reminded of situations where a non-player character, such as an innkeeper, becomes a target for this type of character, this type of player, simply because I did a bit of description of the way he or she carries themselves. So I'll give you a comparison. Let's speak of two separate innkeepers, two inns side by each, one of which is intrinsically wealthy, and the other one which is nominally broke. If I'm describing these, I'm going to, for example, ask you in the audience to take a look at these, and then if you give me some feedback on it, which of these two you believe to be the more valuable or wealthy of the two individuals, which one you think might have the most to give to the adventurers in terms of value, and whether or not there's a difference between the two. So let me introduce to you Feldman. Feldman operates a structure that is just inside the city walls, very near to the main road of town. The place is laid out very open. There's you can see all the way into the kitchen area. There's a large open pit barbecue upon which the various types of meats are being cooked to perfection. There is an ample salad bar just to the left as you enter, which is kind of strange because normally such wouldn't be differentiated. There might be some reason for the two being separated. In this case, the salad area or the vegetable area is set up almost like a small marketplace within the space, and you have both individually cut and whole forms of various vegetables, from cabbages and, for example, leaf lettuce and things like that. But there's also finely chopped carrots, some, if you will, julienne type beets. It's a very, very ample food supply. The platters upon which the food is offered are simple wood fare, but they're polished to almost a glass-like surface so that the food is placed easily on it. The flatware that is provided is very simple. You're looking at brass spoons, and the chandeliers in the place are just loaded with very fat candles. As a matter of fact, it looks like they actually took wagon wheels and just simply placed the candles, utilizing its own wax to hold it to the surface. So there's plenty of light, and yet it is simple in its appearance. Seating is bench-like along the long tables. But what's interesting about the tables is each of them is inlaid with a layer of some sort of glass-like material under which there are bits and pieces of paraphernalia from ages past. There are herald messages. There are bits and pieces of historical relevance within this enclosed glass tabletops. And a lot of it has intriguing shapes and colors, enough to draw your eye to them considerably. Ultimately, the innkeepers are somewhat distant and aloof. They answer questions, they provide the food, but you can see that they're incredibly busy because of the speed at which they produce the meals and the efficiency with which they bring to the clientele exactly what those clients have ordered. The drink list is rather extensive, and the prices seem incredibly reasonable. One thing to note about this place of Feldman's is that near the gates, there doesn't seem to be anyone of the local population here. This only seems to be a waypoint for those that are traveling through, and that also might lend itself to the aloofness of the crowd, as the aloofness of the staff, as they aren't sure exactly how to interact with these strangers, or perhaps they are just simply treating them with the respect of silence. So now let's go to the next inn, which is a little farther into town, and the owner's name is Voluvius, and Voluvius has his name plastered over the outside of the building. As a matter of fact, he's gone so far as to have magical lights placed on the building that flash day and night, drawing the clientele's eyes from blocks away. Furthermore, the sounds of raucous music and laughter are heard for probably half a block around the building. This seems to be clearly a very fashionable place, very ritzy, and very enticing to the eye. When you first walk in, you find that the floor is perfectly clean, pristine. The marbled surfaces belie a sensibility that seems simple. The menu is very short in terms of numbers of items. The drinks list is rather expensive, and the names include dates of that the vintages were laid down and such. Innkeepers here are very willing to talk. They greet each person with a smile and a laugh and an anecdote, usually very appreciative of the person's appearance, or that note the kind of garb and equipment that person is carrying. This is done in a way that is very loud. It's almost like they've been ordered to welcome anyone that comes in the door, and yet they do take the time to shout out the particular style of equipment, the types of weapons they see that the person is carrying, and such like. The tabletops are very simple, linen cloth. The flatware is of the finest type, silvers and golds, and the attendants, as I said, are very talkative, and they're very familiar. Like they will clap a person on the shoulder, or will meet their gaze when they have a conversation. So now, when you look at these two places, Felbin's and Voluvius, which place among you would you consider to be the most valued in the town? Is there anyone within the audience that wishes to respond? Feel free to type in a response. Otherwise, I'll ramble on. What we're looking for in dealing, as I said, with the murder hobo, the person who might be there to simply rob stuff and go, more than likely we'll see the second place as the appropriate place to hang out, the place to... there you go. You go with Feldman. All right, Scott. So you see where I was going already. Very clever. The first location gives the players lots of times to look into things without being interfered with. They're able to sit back and watch the crowd. They're able to investigate the bits and pieces on the tabletop that might provide information about the story. From a murder hobo standpoint, though, the secondary place would be the clear target, which, of course, if a town is well built, is going to take into account, because there's fundamentally three ways you can handle the murder hobo. First of all, meet force with force. In other words, equip every NPC, every character, even the children in your adventures might have stuff up their sleeves. Hang on a second. Stupid phone, anyway. So, Scott, when you talk about Felbin's, what actually drew your eye to that inn compared to the other one? What was the anchor? I don't know why. While I wait for that, I'll go a little further into the reason why you need to handle the murder hobo. Is that quite often the very concept of an NPC's value only being in terms of experience points earned from defeating them in combat or whatever, it undermines the very capability of telling a story. If I'm worried about every NPC that I wander into the story being a target of my players, it makes it difficult to transfer information and give the players what's necessary to advance the story. Pardon my dry throat. It's very weird. Anyway, the point, I guess, of dealing with this is that there are three ways. The first way, as I said, is meet force with force. The second one is give them anchors. One of my friends would call it giving them weights. You're going to give them conditions within the story that require them to think differently than they do from the way they do. There we go. I'll eventually get that different from down again. I used to do it right properly, and then recently I've slipped a bit. But to cause someone to think differently from the way they have in the past, you have to cause them to internalize what their character is doing. Easiest way, of course, is to give them a home, give them a place in the story that holds them to a level of reality that the standard murder hobo, the standard killing machine, doesn't have. Of course, this usually means giving them a goodly sum of money early in the adventure so that they have the resources to start, or conversely, role-playing into their creation a backstory of actually being part of the adventure. Matt, for example, in one of my games, has a character named Granis, who has as an anchor a job. He actually has a place to which he has to go to generate revenue on a regular basis to pay his operational costs. This is particularly useful at lower level in the character's world, unless you have a really expensive economy, in which case it can also work for mid-range characters. But generally, you have to resolve these kinds of conflicts well before those characters achieve moderate to high level, because once they have the resources, then they, quite frankly, can live out of hotels and eat bad food from their own packs or whatever on a regular basis, and thereby not have to interact with the story. Now, some would say Dungeons & Dragons, by its own model, is set up to be just that, to be just kill the monsters, take their treasure, because everything in the game has an experience value. Everything in the game has the potential to level up. Everything in the game has a stat line, a data block. And that while this is true, it's also interesting to note that this is so that you as a game master can utilize the die rolls and such that are regular in role-playing games to have the villains do the dirty deeds and take out the non-player characters, the non-essentials, if you will. But unfortunately, there we go. Good answer, Scott. Scott, as you may read there, says that he thinks that the second place is a place of sin and thieves. Why are they commenting on gear unless they plan to steal it? Very good. Yeah. Good answer, Scott. Yes, you're a genius. So when we are looking at resolving the murder hobo, therefore we have to find anchors. Clearly a facility, a home can be one. A secondary one that arguably is more theatric but a little more difficult to pull off is the love interest or the social interest, the person that the characters get involved with, that they feel a synergy with, sympathy. When you create those kind of NPCs, it's an interesting course to walk, because, quite frankly, emotional relationships within a role-play game can be a time suck. You can definitely get lost in the weeds of pursuing what you would do if you were in love with somebody. But it does cause the player characters to think twice before they commit a murder or rob someone, if they know that their grandmother lives in that town, or that people who know them are going to be aware of what they might do, and all this. So there's an interesting dynamic involved when you add the social interaction portion to your game. Again, when dealing with a player whose real objectives are not the same as the player group, and instead they've kind of taken a solo course. These kinds of anchors can be ultra useful if you can link them back to the other players in the group, which causes them to be connected. It causes them to feel a need to be a part of what is going on. It's ironic also that when you want to deal with players of a strong will and a strong intent, you really have one of two choices in dealing with them within the group. And the first one, and I'm going to probably hear some gasps of surprise at this one, but by making the villain, by making this murder hobo, this disorganized person, actually be the player group's spokesman, it causes a social mechanic that I call familial or filial, as in brotherly attachment. And what can happen in this situation is that the PC who has been the aggressor suddenly is put in a role where he's got to protect the party and its integrity within the story as part of his role as a character. And this tends to soften their approach, to cause them to be perhaps circumspect about what they attempt. Ultimately, another tool that can be used, well, I said ultimately, I mean the last one, but one of the great tools that can be used is to cause the murder hobo, if you will, to have as his objective a moral stance. So you place it as part of the contingency of the NPC. This is easy when they play characters that have such moral compulsions, paladins and the like. But if they are playing characters who traditionally don't have that kind of a role, you have to look for other resources and other ways to handle it. And what I've also found is to give each of those players their moment in the sun, the reason they need this compulsion to desire to fight and to take down things has more to do with the fact that they want to acquire, they want to advance. And so if you in each adventure give them their 2 or 3 minutes of either A, sheer destructive power, or B, control of the environment so that they feel like they're moving towards their goals, then they tend to calm down a bit because they're playing, realizing that they have succeeded. Now, if every session you play, there is one or more persons that take on this murder hobo role, this hyper-aggressive positioning, you have to think a little bit about how you are a storyteller and what it is you provide, because there may be something in there that is contributing to this experience. For example, wow, I sound like Captain Kirk for a second. For example, when you are describing the monster or the NPC, do you draw attention to their weaponry? Do you suggest that they might be a worthy adversary in combat? Do you give clues that the situation might be martial? Maybe it's supposed to be a fight scene, because the players feed off of what you as a game master provide. When you are building the story and you put in let's say I put in at Felden's a bouncer who was particularly abusive as far as verbally so, and seemed rather tough, it might actually draw players to think that they're supposed to fight him. You see, the relationship in a story has to be one where you're clear about your objectives so that the players can be clear about theirs. The more work you do to build into the story things that draw towards combat, the more likely your players are going to react to each scenario or action with conflict and combat or aggression. So if you're wanting instead to have a more peaceful environment more thoughtful, then spend more time dealing with what might be clues to puzzles. As I described in Felbin's place, there are clearly things to be found out in the glass cases, and each one of them is going to be unique and different. And so, the more you want to provide, the more attention you draw to the other tables than the one that the players are sitting at. Not only that, by creating a situation where the tables are important, suddenly the characters are going to get involved with other people as they want to move over and take a look at what's on each of those tables. Make sure, of course, when you do such a thing, you put a limit to the number of tables, or otherwise you'll be describing stuff all night. Now, not that that's a bad thing. You could spend an entire evening at, for example, with the Casca and Cleaver. You go to one of those restaurants that does that with the kitsch, and you can walk around investigating and making up stories and such like about all the stuff you see on the tables and such. And that could be the entire adventure. But the point I'm trying to make is that what you want in your game is what you put into your game. If it's combat you want, then combat you shall have. If you want to run a conflict that entices people to murder your NPCs, by all means, make every NPC an aggressor. That would certainly do it. On the other hand, if you instead put in an environment where violence is responded to by the local authorities, if you make it so that such draws the attention of the authorities or whatever. Hey, Cody, nice to have you with us. If you, on the other hand, are looking at it from the standpoint of wanting a nice mix of the story, you can try one of the strategies I have, and that is I try to use, in description of my NPCs, 3 terms at least. And almost always it'll be a noun, a verb, and an adjective or an adverb. So, for example, if you are sitting in an inn and there's a mysterious individual in the corner, perhaps that person in the corner is an old dwarf smoking a pipe lazily. Or, on the other hand, maybe that person in the corner is a darkly dressed youth staring incessantly. By using these words, not only do you get the idea that the character might have something important as an input, but you also make it so that the players have a better visual of what that NPC looks like and perhaps what his intent is. By doing so, you give the players the opportunity to build into the story their reactions to what you've described. And by using short terms that are abrupt and yet somewhat enigmatic, you give the players the opportunity to grab the pieces they want to chew on and thereby help you drive the story. What I find particularly fascinating is that if I describe 6 people in a room to the players, inevitably the one that I thought that they would want to go and pursue is the one they ignore. I think that has everything to do with fear of red herrings. And what I mean by that is a player comes into the game to want to interact with the world, but if you make it too clearly obvious that point A is where they should go, the party will do everything in its power to not go to point A. They will do whatever they can to engage the world the way they want to, not the way you want to. So the clever part is to create your NPCs and your conditions in such a way that the players make the choice that you would have wanted them to choose anyway. And while it is somewhat of an art form, it is also something that players, rather the GMs can acquire over time simply by making different attempts and watching how their players interact and respond to them. When you are dealing with someone who doesn't have a connection, obviously the first thing we said is to make them have a connection, but now I want to talk about the next part, and that is find ways to punish the characters in story for overt aggression. Within a city environment, even within a small town environment, it's fairly easy to do because you can use localized shame. Oh, there we go. Really? I like that one, Allie. Though, even though it's kind of the opposite of me, it helps to make a lovable NPC that the NPCs hate to kill. I prefer to think of it as I create villains that you so desire to kill that you'll do whatever it takes to get to them. But I see your point. Yeah, if there's clever, cute ones like Tygo and oh, Lepook, yeah, you're not the party isn't gonna smack them. That's very true. The the interesting thing about that though is that a murder hobo when he walks into the story isn't going to see lovable. He's not even going to see hateable. He's going to look for pile o' treasure. You know, people walk into Tygo's shop of many things, and they go, "Oh, we could rob this place in the after hours." And yet, if they know Tygo's background, that he was once an adventurer, that he's you know had all these ages to prepare his shop, maybe they'll be more daunted in that attempt. Well, when we're dealing with the murder hobo, I have to speak a little bit about player agenda. When a player is in a story, when a player's character is in a story, and that player has a mental picture of storytelling in terms of guiding it directly to them as a player, there can be difficulties when their agenda is not met, or when their uh, ideas about things uh, are overlooked. So it's important to hold on to what you want as a GM, but to be very careful to listen to what the players want. And that doesn't mean you feed into a special snowflake. That isn't that you placate the murder hobo by letting them kill, for example, a needed NPC or whatever, and find another way to get them the information in the story, which is okay. I mean, that's ultimately one way to do it, but the real focus is to bring back to the players the realization that they are part of an ensemble, that they are not the only character in the story. And this can be done through local authorities actually breaking up fights and arresting the aggrieving parties or whatever, or perhaps local shaming, that when they do go into this kind of thing, the local authorities and the local people respond adversely to it and therefore clam up and take away the very purpose for which the person might have done the bad deed. I guess for me, one of the most critical parts about dealing with player characters in the story is that you need them to be as interested in concluding the story or moving forward in the story as you, the game master, are. If at any time you see people looking away, staring at their phones, looking out the window, all of these signs indicate that maybe your story is not hitting the mark and you need to find ways instead to draw them back into the story. I liken it to being a soccer coach who's got a bunch of 9-year-olds and they're all running around, scurrying about on the field, and yet some of them will simply run off the course, run off the edge of the field, so to speak. So the game master, the storyteller's real objective is to push all the players back into play when they start to drift off. When a special snowflake starts to lose attention, yeah, you can draw attention back to them, but only for the instant that it takes for you to say, yeah, you're still part of the game. Remember, you're the guard. While you're standing, you see something mysterious off in the corner. Might want to take note of that, and all of a sudden re-engage them that way rather than feeding into their desire to be every place at once. I guess in a way, this session is more about dealing with all the different types, because while I started off only dealing with the hobos, the reality is that player characters in a story shift from style and type to style and type over time and for different purposes. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that sometimes the player's real life is encroaching on their game world. And I'm reading this real quickly. Ali says, I made a strict system on bounty hunters and quests to limit, stealing bounty and having strict killing rules. Okay. That's definitely an interesting way to do it. Creating rules and such. The the challenge will be, of course, enforcement thereof. If you're willing to take it to the next level, so to speak, and take those players to task when they do break them, that certainly will work. I found that the more strict a system you build to guard the weak spots in a story, the more likely it is that it will get broken. In other words, in the words of Leia when speaking with Grand Moff Tarkin, the more tighter you close your grasp, the more systems or the more murder hobos will slip through your fingers, because they will learn to follow the rules, and they tend to be pretty good at the rules lawyering, finding the parts in your structure that allow them to get away with whatever, and thereby you actually get hoisted on your own petard. So really, it does come back around to you as a game master being able to enforce those rules, whether it be through direct physical police action or social shaming, or even if you have to get the party members involved. We had a situation recently where the players had become untenable together, and so the discussion had to be made about what motivates a player's character, more so than even what motivates the player, but what motivates the player's character to act in a certain specific way, and to determine whether or not that character is still tenable in the story, or whether it might need to be swapped out for another. In all candor, the toughest job that a role play storyteller has is to keep the players in the story rather than keeping the story in front of them, because the story will come out, because the players will search for their own interpretation of the environment you put them in. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to follow your course. They may come to a completely different conclusion. They may even go a different way than the one that you intended, but the story will come out. So it's important to make sure that the players and that you as a game master, yeah, I get it. I get you about the rules. I get you about the limitations you put on them. I wasn't meaning to downplay it at all, Ali. I just was, I see a potential train wreck in your future with a player or two that are outside of that. But no, I'm with you. I totally get that the rules can themselves be role played into the story. Now, when we look at it from the standpoint of what we as game masters do, we have to realize that we have a group of players, not just one. We have a group of players that are watching us, and that our interaction with any one player is being constantly reviewed, if you will, analyzed, and cataloged by the other players at the table. And we have to be as judicious with the rules as we can be, because they will come back to bite us in the future, because other players will be able to say, well, when blah, blah did this, you let him do da, 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 so why don't I get to do blah, blah, blah. I know that's very technical terms there. Make sure you take serious notes on that part right there. That was pretty much word for word. But in the Game Mastery Academy environment, it'll be a little bit more clear to be able to see these different handles, because we actually have a separate section on each of the character roles as a subset of the encountering the character section of the Academy profile. So we are coming to the close of the time for this episode. I want to thank you all for being participants. If you have any further questions, feel free to post them in the notes section here, or of course speak with me the next time you see me in person. I do have a game session tonight for Adventurers League at Gameology in Montclair. I am also there on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. So you can certainly grab me at any of those times in game. And of course, everyone's welcome to come and participate. If you have any questions or whatever, feel free to contact me. This is Jonathan Albin, the Game Market Guru for Just in Time Productions Games Mastery Series. Thank you very much and have a good day.